and what makes them so special. Hey everyone, welcome to The Whole Truth, where I'm taking you through the entire Bible. We're not skipping anything because God's Word has the answers for our lives and it is all applicable to us. Now, we're in Exodus chapter 13 today, and while you find Exodus chapter 13, you'll need to grab a Bible and look at Exodus chapter 13, but I also want you to look at Matthew chapter 15. There's a kind of a troublesome statement that happens there, troublesome to our minds at times. And so in Matthew chapter 15 and verse 24, so you find Exodus 13, put your finger there in Exodus 13, and then turn over to the New Testament. Look at Matthew 15 and 24, and read what Jesus says. It's in the middle of performing a miracle or getting ready to perform a miracle. Jesus throws out this statement and says, "But he answered and said, I was not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." Now that's caused some consternation for some people. I mean, that's really caused some deep thought. What did Jesus mean by saying he was not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel? Was Jesus only sent for Israel? And what about the rest of us? Well, in Exodus chapter 13, we start to see the picture of what God was going to do. We're going to talk about that here in a little bit, what God's going to do compared to what he's already done. All right, so Exodus 13 and verse 1. Exodus 13 and verse 1, we read this. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Consecrate to me all the firstborn, whatever opens the womb among the children of Israel, both man and beast, it is mine." Okay, so God says, consecrate all the males to me that are firstborn. Okay, firstborn male, that is the Lord's. If it's on the farm or in the family, okay, in the house or outside in the field, it is consecrated to the Lord. And by the way, he does the same thing with the first fruits later. He'll say the first fruits are his. They're consecrated unto him. Now, how would you consecrate something? If we're going to talk about consecrating, we need to understand how, because it makes the full picture. We would consecrate something, or they would consecrate something in two ways. Number one, sacrifice it. It's as simple as that. If it's a lamb, firstborn lamb, sacrifice that lamb to the Lord. If it's in the field, if it's of the crop, they would burn it. They would make a grain offering, a wave offering unto the Lord. They would take the grain and they would burn it on the altar. They would take the first fruit. If it was corn that came up, they would take the first part of the corn that came up, first fruits offering, they would give it to the Lord. They would consecrate it to him. Now, they would also do the same consecration. They would do that for their children, but they wouldn't sacrifice their children. How would you consecrate your child unto the Lord? Well, they would consecrate their children unto the Lord by redeeming it. They would use something else to sacrifice in place of their child. They're not going to sacrifice their child, but they would take a lamb and they would sacrifice a lamb in redemption of their child. They would redeem their child, their firstborn child, and it would do that to consecrate the child to the Lord, set the child apart for the Lord. Now, does that mean the other children don't matter? Well, no, of course the other children matter. God was making a picture. He was painting for us something that he was already doing or something he was going to be doing in the future. He is saying that, Israel, you are my chosen people. Now, you're so much my chosen people that God's reminding them, I chose to deliver you out of Egypt. We say that so flippantly, but I want you to really think about that. God took his own effort to deliver this people. In other words, it's not a deliver, it's not a person, it's not a situation. It's not because they warred, it's not because they were good at machinery, it's not because they were good at weaponry that Israel was able to be delivered. No, God did it. God delivered them. So God took his effort to deliver this people. They're his people. So on an individual level, you consecrate the firstborn to me. That's what God is saying. And on a national level, God is saying, I'm consecrating Israel. I'm consecrating you to me. So you can demonstrate the way that I've consecrated you to myself by consecrating your children unto me. It's a pledge. When they're consecrating their children, when Israel is consecrating her children and her livestock and her first fruits unto the Lord, when they're dedicating that to the Lord, it's not saying that the rest of the crop doesn't matter. It's not saying the rest of the farm doesn't matter. It's not saying the rest of the family doesn't matter. It's saying we recognize that, Lord, you have delivered us, and Lord, what you have done for us. And so we are dedicating our firstborn son unto you. We're consecrating him unto you, just like you consecrated us unto yourself. You see how that works? Let's read a little further, and it'll make a little more sense as we go. So I'm in verse 3, Exodus 13, verse 3. And Moses said to the people, remember this day in which you went out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage, for by strength of hand the Lord brought you out of this place. No leavened bread shall be eaten on this day. No leavened bread shall be eaten on this day you are going out in the month of Abib. And it shall be when the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, which he swore to your fathers to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey, that you shall keep this service in this month. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and on the seventh day there shall be a feast to the Lord. Unleavened bread shall be eaten 7 days, and no leaven shall be seen among you, nor shall leaven be seen among you in all your quarters. And you shall tell your son in that day, saying, This is done because of what the Lord did for me when I came up from Egypt. And it shall be as a sign to you, to your hand, and as a memorial between your eyes, that the Lord's law may be in your mouth. With a strong hand the Lord has brought you out of Egypt. You shall therefore keep this ordinance in its season from year to year. Now, we've already talked about leaven and how leaven represented sin, and that's why they took it out. And so God is reminding them, and through Moses, reminding the people, hey, no leaven in the house. You're going to, as the Lord has delivered us, and we had to leave in haste, and there was no leaven in the bread, you are going to have no leaven in your house, and we'll have a feast for 7 days. You're going to have no leaven, and then we're going to have a feast at the end of that 7 days. I hope that makes sense. That's the process that they're going through. But notice why they were going through it, so that they could tell their sons, this is why we're doing it. Because the Lord delivered us out of Egypt. Remember, it's not our strength, it's not our weapons, it's not our fighting skills, it's not our army, but it was the Lord who delivered us. And so we're taking this time and we're dedicating this time. Remember what God told them. This will be the first month. Now, this month, when they celebrate the Passover feast, is going to be the first month. They take the firstborn and they consecrate the firstborn. Why? Because God is consecrating this nation. It's his firstborn. The nation of Israel is his chosen people. They're God's people. They're his children. Look at this. It's in verse 11. And it shall come to pass when the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites, as he swore to you and your fathers, and gives it to you, that you shall set apart to the Lord all that opens the womb. That is every firstborn that comes from an animal which you have. The males shall be the Lord's. But every firstborn of a donkey you shall redeem with a lamb. And if you will not redeem it, then you shall break its neck. And the firstborn of man among your sons you shall redeem. And so it shall be when your sons ask you in time to come, saying, what is this? That you say to him, by strength of hand, the Lord has brought us out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. And it shall come to pass when Pharaoh was stubborn about letting us go, that the Lord killed the firstborn in Egypt, both firstborn of man and firstborn of beast. Therefore I sacrifice to the Lord all males that open the womb, but all the firstborn of my sons I redeem. And it shall be a sign on your hand and as frontlets between your eyes. For by strength of hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt. See, there it is again. Your sons are going to ask, why are you doing this? Why do you sacrifice the first animal? And you are going to remind your children, because the Lord delivered us. And when Pharaoh was being stubborn, the Lord killed the firstborn in Egypt, but he delivered us. He redeemed us. In the same way, we kill the firstborn, but we redeem you, our children. And in a national way, guess what? God did that with Israel. Israel was God's firstborn, and God redeemed them. How did he redeem them? With his son, Jesus Christ. But what about the rest of the family? Did the rest of the family not matter? Of course they mattered. What about the rest of the nations then? If Israel is the chosen nation, what about the rest of the nations? Of course they matter. Of course they matter. If we're going to use, remember where I started this video talking about Matthew chapter 15 and verse 24, where Jesus said he came for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Well, if we're going to use Matthew chapter 15, then go ahead and look in Matthew at chapter 28. Look at chapter 28 and look at verse 18, as we see that Jesus said this. And Jesus said, all authority has been given unto me in heaven and on earth. He said, go therefore and make disciples of all nations. Go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things that I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even until the end of the age. Get it? Take the things I commanded you, but you teach them to all nations. Baptize them. You go to all nations. So did Jesus come for the lost house of Israel? Of course. Yes. And he also came for us. And just like the children of Israel, when they would see, what was happening and say, what is going on? And we could be reminded, or they would remind their children, they would say to their children, this is because the Lord delivered us. In the same way, we can trust in that the Lord has delivered us because he has sent his own son, Jesus, to die for us and to redeem us. So I want to end today with Romans chapter 1 and verse 16, where Paul says this very famous verse where Paul says, for I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it's the power of God unto salvation for everyone who believes. So Paul said he's not ashamed of the gospel. The gospel is the power of God unto salvation for everyone who believes. But check this out, the last part of that verse, for the Jew first, and also for the Greek. You see, the firstborn was set aside. They were consecrated. They were God's chosen people, consecrated unto the Lord. That's Israel. And then, what about the rest of us? Well, God redeemed us as well through his son, Jesus Christ, to the Jew first, and then also to the Greek. Glory be his name, that he was willing to draw us into the family, and that his redemption counts for all who will believe. I hope that you've been redeemed by the Lamb today. All right, I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I'll see you tomorrow with more of Exodus chapter 13. See you then.